The cafe sat on a busy street where people came and went all day long. It wasn't a fancy place, but it had a warm feeling that made people return again and again. The smell of fresh coffee drifted out the door every morning, and the soft light inside made it feel peaceful even when the world outside was loud and fast. In the middle of this cafe worked a young waitress who moved quietly from table to table. She wasn't the type to talk much. She smiled politely, took orders quickly, and never argued even if someone spoke to her rudely. Many of the regular customers liked her calm nature and the way she remembered their usual orders. They always greeted her kindly. But not everyone treated her that way. One afternoon, just when the lunch rush ended and the cafe was settling into its slow, relaxed rhythm, a group of well-dressed guests walked in. They looked like they had come straight from an office meeting or some important event. Their shoes were shiny, their perfumes strong, and their voices loud. The moment they stepped inside, the peaceful atmosphere shifted a little. They carried themselves with the kind of confidence that often came with assuming they were more important than everyone else around them. The waitress approached them with her usual gentle tone, holding her small notepad. But even before she could greet them properly, one of them waved a hand at her as if she had been too slow. Another looked at her clothes and smirked, as though working in a cafe made her someone beneath them. They spoke to her in short, sharp sentences, making comments they probably thought she wouldn't notice. But she did. She heard every single word. Still, she didn't let it show. She had trained herself to stay calm. She took their order, nodded politely, and walked back to the counter. The cafe owner watched all of this from behind the counter. He had seen many types of customers over the years, and he could almost instantly tell when someone was going to be difficult. He also knew his waitress well. She was humble, hardworking, and carried a quiet strength that few people noticed. He had seen her handle rude customers before, always with patience. But today, he felt a bit more protective because he knew something the customers didn't know. She wasn't just a waitress. She had a talent, a rare one, something she never talked about unless someone asked. In the corner of the cafe stood an old upright piano. Most visitors assumed it was only for decoration. Some even joked about it, saying it didn't look like it could hold a tune anymore. But the owner knew that the instrument still had life in it, and more importantly, he knew that the waitress had once played it beautifully. She had told him, only once, about her past, how she used to play in small competitions, how she practiced for hours, and how music was something she loved deeply. But life changed. Responsibilities appeared, and she had to look for work that paid regularly. Playing piano didn't fit into that new life, so she took the job at the cafe and slowly stopped performing, a few days before. The cafe had arranged a small evening event where a musician would perform, but the musician had canceled at the last minute. The owner had been thinking about asking the waitress to play, but he hesitated because he didn't want to push her. Yet seeing how the rude group treated her made something stir inside him. Maybe this was the right moment. Maybe she needed a chance to remember who she really was. He called her over quietly when she brought the trays back. She turned to him quickly, trying to hide the slight tension in her voice, the one that always appeared after dealing with difficult customers. The owner leaned in and gently asked if she could help him with something important. She looked confused at first, expecting it to be a work-related task. But when he explained that the musician had canceled and he needed someone to fill and someone who could play the piano, her eyes widened slightly. She didn't answer right away. She stared at the piano in the corner, the same one she had ignored for months. A long moment passed before she finally said she wasn't sure if she could do it. She hadn't played in front of people in a long time. But the owner gave her a reassuring smile, the kind that told her he truly believed in her. After thinking for another moment, she nodded slowly. She didn't promise anything impressive, but she agreed to try. As she went back to work, the rude group continued behaving the same way. They snapped their fingers to get her attention faster. They whispered comments about her, calling her slow or unprofessional. When she accidentally spilled a drop of water on their table while placing a glass down, one of them raised his eyebrows dramatically and laughed, making the others laugh too. She apologized immediately and cleaned it up, But their sarcasm didn't stop. Even though she didn't show her frustration, it built quietly inside her. Not anger, she never allowed herself to reach that point, but sadness mixed with a small sense of helplessness. She didn't understand why people treated others badly for no reason. She didn't expect praise or sympathy. She simply wished they would treat her like a human being doing her job. The owner watched from the counter again, seeing how she tried her best to stay calm. He shook his head slightly, feeling disappointed in the way the group acted. But he didn't say anything. He knew something they didn't. The evening would show them a side of her they never imagined. As the afternoon passed, more customers entered the cafe. People found seats near the windows, the doors, or close to the piano. The quiet chatter grew again. When the time for the small performance arrived, the owner stepped forward and tapped the small microphone placed near the piano. The sound echoed slightly through the cafe. Grabbing everyone's attention, he announced that they would be having a short live performance to make the evening special. The rude group looked at each other, rolling their eyes as if they were about to hear something uninteresting. One of them even whispered loudly, "This should be fun," dripping with sarcasm. They expected a random amateur, maybe an older customer trying to relive old memories, but then the waitress walked toward the piano. She didn't rush. She didn't look nervous, though her heart felt heavier with each step. She wiped her hands on her apron gently, placed the tray she was holding on the counter, and moved closer to the piano. The rude group stared at her in complete confusion. One of them leaned forward with disbelief. "What is she doing?" he murmured. Other customers watched with curiosity too. Some knew she worked at the cafe for months, but never imagined she could play an instrument. The owner stood a few steps behind her. Giving her an encouraging nod, she sat on the piano bench slowly, almost as if she wanted to make sure she wouldn't break the moment by moving too fast. Her fingers hovered above the keys. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a brief moment, and then placed her hands gently on the piano. Silence filled the cafe. The rude group stopped talking. Even those who were laughing previously seemed frozen. They didn't understand what was happening, but something about the atmosphere had changed. The owner watched closely. He could see the spark in her expression, the one he had seen only once when she talked about her past. She pressed the first note. It was soft, clean, almost fragile, but it carried something strong within it. A kind of emotion that didn't need words. The sound spread across the cafe like a warm wave, making everyone look up instantly. The rude group blinked, stunned by how rich the first note sounded, and that was just the beginning. The first note hung in the air like a gentle breath, and for a moment no one even moved. The cafe, which had been full of quiet talking a few minutes earlier, felt almost completely still. The rude group stared at the waitress, unable to understand how the same person they had been mocking was now sitting at the piano with such calm confidence. Even the people near the door stopped mid-step as the sound reached them, turning their heads as if something unseen had pulled their attention. She pressed the next few keys, and a soft melody began to form. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was slow, warm, and full of emotion, like someone telling a story without using any words. As her fingers moved gently across the piano, the room slowly filled with a peaceful feeling. The notes blended smoothly, creating a sound that made people want to close their eyes and simply listen. Some customers did exactly that. A couple near the window lowered their cups, letting the steam rise untouched. A young man who had been scrolling on his phone put it down completely, leaning forward instead. Even the staff behind the counter paused their work. The owner stood to the side, his arms gently folded, watching her with a proud smile that wasn't too obvious but couldn't be hidden either. The rude group, the same people who had laughed at her earlier, now looked like they didn't know where to put their eyes. One of them let out a slow breath he didn't even realize he was holding. Another shifted in his chair, feeling a little embarrassed without knowing why. Their expressions softened as the music continued, and the noise from outside the cafe faded until it felt like the world had paused around them. The waitress kept playing, letting her hands follow the melody she had practiced long ago. She hadn't touched a piano in months, but somehow her fingers remembered every small movement. She could feel her heartbeat calming, her nerves melting away with each note she played. For the first time in a long time, she felt free, completely free. It was as if the stress of the day slowly faded each time. Her fingers touched a key. The group that had treated her badly earlier now exchanged glances, their eyes showing a mix of guilt and disbelief. They had walked in thinking she was just a quiet waitress who would never stand up for herself, someone they could speak to however they liked. But the person sitting at the piano now was someone completely different, someone talented, someone graceful, someone they had underestimated more than they cared to admit. As the music grew a little stronger, the emotions in the room deepened. The notes carried feelings of struggle, hope, loss, and joy, everything she had held inside her without speaking. People could feel it even if they didn't know anything about her past. Her music felt honest, and honesty always touched people. A few customers had tears in their eyes, not because the melody was sad, but because it felt real. Real feelings often made people react in ways they didn't expect. One woman near the counter quietly wiped her cheek, hoping no one would notice. A man sitting close to the piano leaned forward with both elbows on his knees, trying to understand how this simple cafe performance could make him feel so much. The rude group was the most affected of all. They didn't clap, whisper, or smirk. They sat completely still, listening as though they had never heard music before. The waitress had not looked at them once since she started playing. She didn't need to. The music itself was enough to show them who she truly was. As the melody reached its middle point, it shifted. The notes grew lighter, almost brighter, carrying a gentle sense of hope. It felt like someone opening a window after a long winter. A warm feeling spread through the cafe, and even people outside paused to listen through the open door. The waitress could feel the room reacting to her music. It gave her courage. She allowed herself to add more emotion, letting her fingers dance more confidently across the keys. She didn't rush. She took her time, letting the music shape the moment naturally. Every person watching her felt as if they were being quietly reminded that talent can come places they never expect. By the time she began to reach the final section of the piece, the cafe was filled with a thick, peaceful silence, the kind of silence that only comes when everyone is fully present. She didn't look up, but she could sense the room's energy change. For the first time in that entire day, she felt fully seen, not as a waitress, not as someone to be ordered around, but as a person with something special to share. The rude group looked down at their hands, unable to meet each other's eyes. They were thinking about their earlier actions, the snapping fingers, the rude comments, the mocking tone. They now felt a heavy sense of guilt because they finally understood that they were wrong. They had misjudged someone without knowing anything about her. The music made that mistake feel even heavier. She played the final note softly, almost like a whisper. Then she lifted her hands from the keys slowly, letting the last sound fade naturally. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then the cafe erupted into applause. It wasn't the usual polite clapping people give at small events. It was loud, cheerful, and full of admiration. People stood up from their chairs. Some even whistled, others clapped so hard their hands turned red. A couple near the window wiped tears again, smiling widely as they applauded. Even customers who had just stepped in joined without knowing exactly what they were applauding for, because they could feel the excitement filling the room. The waitress looked a little overwhelmed. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. She stood up shyly from the piano bench, bowed her head slightly as a thank you, and then stepped back. The owner clapped the hardest. He nodded proudly at her, silently saying, "I knew you could do it." The rude group stood as well, but their applause was different. Their faces were red not from excitement, but from the embarrassment of realizing how wrong they had been. When the clapping finally slowed and the customers returned to their seats, the group approached her quietly. They didn't carry the same loud pride they had before. Their voices were lower, more respectful. One of them cleared his throat before speaking. He apologized softly, saying they had acted poorly earlier and didn't give her the respect she deserved. Another admitted they never imagined she could play so beautifully, and that they felt ashamed of how they behaved. Their words were awkward but honest. She listened, not with anger or bitterness, but with kindness. She gave a gentle smile and nodded. She told them it was okay and that sometimes people make quick judgments without knowing someone's story. Her tone wasn't sarcastic or cold. It was warm, showing she didn't carry grudges. The group thanked her again before returning to their table, but something had changed in them. They sat more quietly, ordered politely, and didn't complain about anything. They treated her with genuine respect for the rest of the evening. Word about her performance spread quickly after that night. People started telling their friends about the waitress who played the piano like a professional. More customers visited the cafe, hoping to hear her play again. She didn't perform every day, but sometimes, when the cafe felt right and the mood was peaceful, she would sit at the piano and let her fingers move again. The owner even suggested she could give small music lessons in her free time. And a few families asked if she could teach their children. Slowly, she began rebuilding the part of her life she had almost forgotten. The part that loved music more than anything. Even the rude group returned a week later. But this time they walked in with softer voices and kinder expressions. They greeted her politely and thanked her again for the performance they couldn't stop thinking about. The moment that started with disrespect ended with a deep lesson for everyone in the room. Never judge someone by the job they do or the quiet way they carry themselves. Because sometimes the people you underestimate the most are the ones who hold the most extraordinary gifts inside them.